Taking pictures of things that are moving requires a bit of care. It's always tempting to just use the fastest shutter speed that you can get, but often really quick shutter speeds will just stop things absolutely dead, and you may as well have taken a picture of something static. So understanding how to use your camera and how to use long exposures is a really good way of emphasising the movement of subjects through your frame. Here we've set up over these railway tracks through this bridge. We found this very fortunately sized and positioned hole in the fence that we can shoot through, so we're not having to find kind of gaps and we haven't got big lines running through our image. On this camera we're using Pro mode, and that gives us access to different aspects of the exposure that you don't ordinarily get hold of, just because they're a bit tricky for newcomers to get to grips with. The key thing when you're trying to emphasise the movement of something in your frame is that you want your subject to be apparently visibly moving, and you want everything else in the frame to be absolutely static. And that makes hand holding at long exposures really difficult to do. You'll often get loads of movement off your subject, but then loads of jiggle in the rest of your frame. And that's why we're shooting off this tripod set here nice and steady on the ground. It's something I'm doing my very best not to touch. And when I press the shutter release on the camera, I'm being careful to only really gently press it so that my action doesn't end up moving things around. With this Pro mode, what we're able to do is choose shutter priority, and that means that I can choose how long the camera's sensor is active. And on a longer duration shutter, anything that moves through the frame is going to smear across and give us that nice kind of motion blur. The only thing to watch about long exposures in daylight like this is that you're going to see very hot exposures. That means overexposures where the brightest parts of your frame start to bleed out to white. So ordinarily your camera on a day like this is going to be at about 100th, 125th of a second. That's nice and easy to hand hold and still get a sharp image, but it doesn't give you lots of opportunity for intentional movement. So in Pro mode and in shutter priority, here you see it highlighted in yellow, we're going to pick up this slider and slow the shutter down to maybe about a 15th of a second or so, which is a much longer exposure, and as our train comes barreling along these tracks, you're going to pick up loads of motion blur. The thing that you'll notice is the image is now much too bright. It's overexposed because the camera can't reduce the sensitivity of its camera sensor anymore, and it can't shut down its aperture anymore. Luckily, I've brought a DIY ND filter. ND stands for neutral density. You see them a lot when you're shooting on video cameras and things like that. But here what we're going to do is use my sunglasses for the only thing they're good for on a day like this. We're just going to slide over the top of the lens there. That darkens the image, it corrects the exposure, and it's a really great way of allowing us to use longer exposures even on quite bright days. And also give us a nice kind of earthy tint there. And what that does is it reduces the exposure, it allows us to shoot for a longer period, and then we just need to wait for a train to come underneath us, and we can shoot those long exposures and come away with something really impactful and interesting. Okay, so here comes our train. So as it comes under the bridge, the trick here is to cover our bases and shoot as many frames as we can. And then when it comes to about the right place in the frame, we'll start and we'll shoot as much as we can as it goes under, just to give us options and lots of different choices to make our selection from. So looking back at the pictures that I took, you can immediately see the benefits of shooting lots of different options to give yourself the widest choice possible. This frame here looks to me like just a slightly blurry picture of a train. Because the train is coming pretty much straight towards us, you get no sense of its movement. Movement shots like this work best when you've got some lateral movement. That's movement of your subject from left to right. That's when the subject is moving fastest relative to the sensor. So this one goes straight in the bin. This frame I like much more. You can see that we've got much more movement in the train because of where it is in the frame. It's moving much more from kind of left to right. There's more lateral movement, and I really like these colours along the side, this kind of green and yellow splash that you get on there. I also like the way that perspective is working in this frame, where everything's leading to this bridge right at the very top of the frame. I think it looks really great. I also like the positioning of the very front of the train there, just in the top third of the image. I think this works really nicely. Another frame that I really like is this one of the train barreling straight towards us. There's lots of interesting movement in these lights at the front of the train. There's a bit of blur across the top. You get a real sense of kind of speed and movement, with the rest of the frame staying perfectly sharp.